The night they laughed at my wall, I remember the sound more than anything else. Not the words, not the insults, not even the echo of their voices across the small community meeting room. It was the laughter that stayed with me. The kind of laughter that spreads around a table when people believe they are witnessing something ridiculous, something unnecessary, something so over the top that it becomes entertainment. That was the moment the nickname was born. The Great Wall. Not spoken with respect, not even with annoyance, but with the amused tone people use when they believe someone has gone a little too far with their imagination. What they did not understand was that imagination had nothing to do with it. Numbers did. Years of studying water flow did. And a river that had been quietly shifting its behavior for almost a decade did. But to them, it was just a wall. A 4-foot stone-faced, reinforced barrier along the edge of my backyard, where the Cedar River curved close to the properties and evergreen trails. The subdivision brochure had called it scenic waterfront living, and that was technically true. During spring evenings, the reflection of sunset across the slow-moving river could make the whole neighborhood glow orange and gold, like something from a travel magazine. Children rode bikes along the walking trail. Neighbors walked dogs along the bank. Couples drank coffee on their back patios and watched the water slide quietly past. It was peaceful, beautiful, and dangerously deceptive. Because rivers do not stay the same forever. Most people see water and imagine stability. Engineers see water and imagine pressure, movement, weight. I work in civil engineering, specifically hydrology and soil stability, which is a long, complicated way of saying my job is to predict what water will do before it does it. And when I bought my house in Evergreen Trails, I ran the numbers the way some people check the weather forecast, out of habit. Elevation data, rainfall trends, historical flood maps, soil saturation capacity, drainage slopes. At first, the results did not look dramatic, but they looked uncomfortable. Our neighborhood sat just barely above the 100-year floodline, 3 feet above it. 3 feet sounds safe until you look at the trend lines. Rainfall in the region had increased almost 20% over 15 years. Storm systems were stalling longer. River saturation levels were rising faster. Individually, none of those numbers meant disaster. Together, they meant risk. And risk is the language engineers listen to. So I designed a solution. Not a giant fortress, not a concrete bunker, not some ugly slab that would turn the backyard into a prison wall. Just a reinforced retaining barrier integrated into the landscaping, designed to redirect overflow away from the lowest ground in the neighborhood. 4 feet high at the tallest section, stone-faced to match the natural riverbank, with a graded drainage channel that would push excess water toward the communal runoff basin. I spent weeks designing it. Then I submitted the plans to the Homeowners Association. That was the first mistake, because homeowners associations care deeply about one thing above all else: appearance. Not safety, not engineering, not risk, appearance. The first response came in an email 2 weeks later. Denied. The explanation was short. The structure was considered aesthetically inconsistent with the riverbank view. They encouraged me to maintain natural landscaping instead. I requested a meeting. The board scheduled it on a Thursday evening. 5 members sat across the table. Coffee cups, papers, laptops, polite smiles. I laid out flood maps, rainfall projections, soil stability models. I explained how redirecting overflow early prevents downstream pooling. I showed them the exact path water would take if the river ever rose beyond normal levels. They listened politely. Then one of them leaned back in his chair and said something that made the others laugh. He asked if he was expecting the river to turn into the ocean. Another asked if he was planning to build a castle behind my house. Someone joked about medieval defenses. That was the moment someone said it. The Great Wall. And suddenly the whole room laughed. Laughter is powerful because it changes the energy of a conversation. Once people laugh, they stop taking the subject seriously. And once the subject stops being serious, decisions stop being careful. They denied the proposal again. I modified the design, lowered the profile, added landscaping stone caps, decorative edging. Denied again. The explanation changed slightly. Now the concern was that it might disrupt the visual harmony of the riverbank. Visual harmony, a phrase that sounds elegant until you realize it means nothing.
At that point, I did what most homeowners do when an HOA blocks something reasonable. I checked the law. And the law was very clear. Homeowners associations can regulate cosmetic features, but they cannot override municipal approval for structural safety improvements on private property. So I went to the city. The city reviewed the engineering plans, inspected the property, verified the permits, and approved the structure without hesitation. Once that happened, the HOA technically had no authority to stop construction. But that did not stop them from trying. The violation letters started arriving almost immediately. Daily fines. $200 per day for non-compliant construction. Neighbors started noticing the activity in my backyard. Concrete trucks, stone pallets, workers measuring the riverbank. Questions started appearing in the community social media group. Some people were curious, most were amused.
Someone posted a photo of the half-finished wall and wrote, "Here comes the Great Wall of Evergreen." The nickname stuck instantly. Children riding bikes along the trail would slow down and point. Adults walking dogs would glance over and shake their heads. One afternoon, I overheard two board members walking past the river path behind my house. One of them stopped and looked directly at the structure. Then he laughed and said, "Imagine thinking a little wall can stop a river." The other replied, "At least it will keep his imagination from floating away." They both laughed and continued walking. I kept working. Because the truth about prevention is simple. It always looks unnecessary right up until the moment it becomes essential. Construction finished in late autumn. Stone-faced, reinforced drainage, integrated landscaping planted around the base. From most angles, it looked like part of the natural riverbank. But the nickname remained, the Great Wall. Winter passed quietly. Spring arrived mild and dry. And for a while, it seemed like the neighborhood had been right. The river stayed calm. The weather stayed predictable. Even my wife asked one evening while we were sitting on the patio if maybe the wall had been overkill. I told her something every engineer learns eventually. Prevention always feels expensive until the disaster arrives. Then it feels cheap. The rain started slowly that summer. At first it felt normal. 2 days of steady showers, then 3, then a full week. Storm systems stalled over the region in a way meteorologists had not predicted. Clouds hung low over the valley. The ground stopped absorbing water. The river rose inch by inch. The first emergency alert appeared on local news 9 days into the rain. Upstream reservoirs were approaching capacity. Flood monitoring had begun. Neighbors started buying sandbags. The HOA sent an email reminding residents to avoid unnecessary panic. That email would later become famous in the neighborhood for all the wrong reasons, because unnecessary panic is what people call preparation before they realize they should have done it. By the 12th day of rain, the river had doubled its normal width. The walking trail disappeared underwater. The current began moving faster, carrying branches, debris, and patches of foam downstream. That night, I walked into the backyard with a flashlight. The beam reflected off dark, moving water only a few feet from the wall. The river had reached it. But instead of crashing into the yard, the water pressed against the barrier, curved along the reinforced slope, and slid toward the drainage channel, exactly the way the model predicted. I went to sleep believing the design was working. What I did not know was that 30 miles upstream, a levee built almost 50 years earlier was under pressure it had never experienced before. And at 3:40 in the morning, the first section failed. Not explosively, not with the dramatic crash people imagine when they think of levees breaking. It started with a slow collapse, water seeping through weakened soil, widening the breach until the river found an opening. Then gravity did the rest. A surge of water moved downstream through the valley faster than anyone expected. Emergency sirens began sounding across nearby towns. Phones lit up with flood alerts. But water does not wait for people to read notifications. By sunrise, evergreen trails looked like a shallow lake. Driveways disappeared beneath muddy water. Garage doors strained under pressure. Basement windows cracked. People rushed outside carrying boxes, furniture, pets, anything they could save. From my backyard, I watched the river press against the wall harder than it had ever before. Water climbed the stone face, then reached the top edge. And instead of spilling forward, it curved along the reinforced slope, pushing sideways toward the drainage channel. The current moved past my property and spread into the lower sections of the neighborhood. Within hours, emergency crews arrived. Pumps, generators, rescue boats. Insurance inspectors would later estimate the damage across evergreen trails at $6 million. 23 homes flooded, 7 with severe structural damage, 1 declared completely uninhabitable. My property remained dry. Not a single drop crossed the wall. For the first time since the nickname started, the Great Wall stopped sounding like a joke. But disasters do strange things to people. They do not just reveal weaknesses in buildings, They reveal weaknesses in pride. And when pride is wounded, people begin searching for someone to blame. 2 weeks later, the Homeowners Association called an emergency meeting in a rented hotel conference room because the community center had been flooded. Residents filled every chair along the walls. Insurance representatives sat near the front. The board members looked exhausted. Then one of them said something that changed the entire direction of the conversation. He suggested that the wall on my property may have redirected water toward neighboring homes. The room became quiet. And for the first time since the flood began, I realized the real storm might just be starting. Because when $6 million disappears underwater, people do not just look at the river, they start looking at each other. And what happened next would reveal something about that wall, something nobody in that room had considered when they were laughing, something hidden inside the engineering calculations that would turn the entire argument upside down. But the truth about that wall and what it actually did to the river would not come out until an environmental consultant arrived 10 days later, carrying a tablet full of measurements, and one simple question that would make the entire HOA board wish they had never mocked the Great Wall in the first place. And when that question was finally asked, the silence in the room would be far heavier than the laughter that started this story.
The morning after the flood, the neighborhood felt different. The silence was heavier than the rain had been, because when water leaves, it takes more than furniture and drywall. It takes certainty. People walked through their driveways in rubber boots, staring at soaked carpets and warped cabinets, and ruined memories stacked on sidewalks, something people photographed during evening walks. But now it had reminded everyone that nature does not care about landscaping committees or neighborhood image guidelines. It moves where gravity tells it to move, and when it finds weakness, it expands. I spent that morning helping neighbors pump water out of their basements, running extension cords across lawns, hauling ruined boxes into piles that would later become insurance photographs. Nobody was laughing anymore. Nobody mentioned the Great Wall nickname that had followed my flood barrier for months. The wall was standing there quietly, doing exactly what it had been designed to do, redirecting pressure, guiding water away, and protecting the only dry foundation on the street. Yet, instead of relief, something strange started to form in the background of conversations. Suspicion. Because disaster makes people search for reasons, and when people cannot control the storm, they start looking for someone close enough to blame. 2 weeks later, the emergency meeting was scheduled. The usual clubhouse had been damaged, so the board rented a small conference room at a highway hotel. Folding chairs lined the walls, the air smelled faintly of wet carpet and frustration. People spoke in low voices while waiting for the meeting to start, and when the board members finally walked in, their expressions were tight, controlled, the way people look when they know the situation is bigger than their authority. The president cleared his throat and began speaking about recovery efforts, insurance coordination, community resilience. But halfway through the discussion, one board member leaned forward and said something that shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. He suggested that the wall I built might have redirected water toward other homes. The words were careful, almost casual, but the implication was clear. Suddenly, the structure they had mocked for months was no longer a joke. It was a potential cause of their losses. And once that idea entered the room, it spread quickly, because grief and anger are powerful accelerants. Neighbors began asking questions about water flow, about redirection, about whether one barrier could change the direction of floodwaters. I listened quietly at first, because I had already studied the hydrology of the entire area long before the first shovel touched the ground. But facts do not always win the first round of a conversation when people are hurting. So I asked a simple question. Had anyone here looked at the official floodplain data before the storm? Silence. Because the truth was, most people had trusted the marketing brochures when they bought their homes. The brochures showed calm river views, sunset reflections on the water, smiling families walking along landscaped paths. They did not show the elevation maps or the hydrology reports or the drainage modeling that revealed how vulnerable the land actually was. The board knew those details, though, or at least they had the opportunity to learn them, because I had presented